I drove 6 hours to a family reunion, but the moment we arrived, I realized it was a trap. My name is Bianca. I am 35 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed my blood relatives had some basic decency left. After an exhausting drive, our vehicle finally rolled onto the familiar gravel driveway leading to my family estate in rural Washington. I immediately felt a cold sense of dread crawling up my spine when I noticed unfamiliar men standing scattered around the property. They were not carrying food or greeting guests like normal people attending a peaceful gathering. Their cold eyes tracked every single movement of our car, like they were guarding a highly anticipated target. My heart began pounding violently against my ribs as my gaze shifted toward the front porch. My brother Chase was standing there looking directly at us with a sickening smirk plastered across his face. My parents stood directly behind him, their expressions incredibly tense, yet they remained entirely silent without making any effort to warn me. "Turn the car around right now," I snapped at my husband Dennis as the terrifying realization of this ruthless betrayal finally clicked into place. Dennis did not ask any questions or hesitate for even a fraction of a second before acting. He gripped the steering wheel tightly and executed a sharp turn that ultimately saved us from walking into a devastating nightmare. That quick decision kept us alive to initiate a completely different kind of revenge against the people who brought those dangerous men to our doorstep. If this story touches your heart, or if you have ever faced a toxic family situation, please leave a like. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the dark truth unfolding behind this betrayal. The tires of Dennis's vehicle ground harshly against the gravel driveway, creating a piercing screech as he threw the transmission into reverse to launch us through the estate gates. A heavy black pickup truck immediately surged out from behind a thick cluster of trees near the entrance, locking onto our rear bumper with a deeply menacing persistence. This was not some reckless cinematic chase filled with blazing speeds, but rather a calculated pursuit designed to instill pure psychological terror on a completely deserted rural road. The stranger behind the wheel maintained a deliberate distance that felt incredibly predatory as the heavy engine roared ominously behind us. Dennis maintained an absolute state of calm focus while gripping the steering wheel, expertly navigating a complex series of sharp turns down unfamiliar dirt routes to deliberately break their line of sight. His decisive maneuvers effectively lost our pursuer within several agonizing minutes before he finally pulled the vehicle into the concealed shadows of a dilapidated gas station situated a few miles away. Sitting quietly inside the parked car while the engine ticked softly, my mind raced to piece together several deeply unsettling occurrences that had disturbed my daily routine over the past few weeks. I recalled a disturbing sequence of anonymous phone calls demanding to know where Chase was hiding, coupled with the troubling memory of an unidentified sedan lingering suspiciously near my company parking lot on multiple occasions. Those fragmented pieces snapped together with horrifying clarity, leading me to the undeniable conclusion that the intimidating men scattered across the property were ruthless debt collectors hunting down massive financial liabilities. They were not there to celebrate a peaceful gathering, but rather to extort whoever walked through those doors in order to recover the massive debts my sibling had accumulated. The realization that these dangerous enforcers had likely been terrorizing the estate for days before my arrival made my blood run entirely cold. That logical deduction quickly morphed into a profoundly devastating realization about the two people who brought me into this world. My parents had known exactly what was waiting for me at the end of that exhausting journey, yet they actively chose to lure me into a carefully orchestrated trap. The vivid image of their tense but entirely silent faces standing on that porch burned into my memory, serving as undeniable proof of their willing complicity. They were perfectly prepared to sacrifice my personal safety, my hard-earned financial stability, and my overall well-being, just to shield Chase from the severe consequences of his own disastrous choices. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal felt like a heavy physical blow to my chest, shattering any lingering illusion of parental love or basic familial loyalty. They had traded my security to ensure his freedom without displaying a single ounce of parental hesitation or remorse. I absolutely refused to let the suffocating weight of their deception paralyze me into a state of helpless panic. Taking a deep breath to steady my shaking hands, I reached into my purse to retrieve my phone and immediately dialed the local law enforcement dispatch center. I clearly provided the emergency operator with our exact coordinates while detailing the aggressive vehicular tailing we had just managed to evade. The dispatcher listened intently as I described the highly suspicious presence of unidentified armed individuals blockading my parents' residence. She took down every detail, carefully confirming the potential severity of the situation while advising us to stay secure until officers arrived. Dennis placed a reassuring hand over mine as we locked the doors and waited under the flickering canopy lights, preparing to document the full extent of this unforgivable betrayal. Involving the authorities meant crossing an absolute point of no return, but I was fully prepared for that consequence. I watched the dark road ahead through the windshield, fully resolved to let the legal system handle the very people who had conspired to destroy my life. 8 years ago, the seeds of this terrifying betrayal began to take root from the deeply toxic favoritism within the house I once called home. Chase had secretly stolen the entirety of my very first savings account to quickly pay off his mounting underground gambling debts. Discovering that unauthorized withdrawal felt like a devastating blow after I had worked countless grueling double shifts to build that essential financial safety net. My immediate reaction was to involve the authorities to recover my stolen earnings and hold the perpetrator legally accountable. My parents vehemently forbade me from reporting the severe theft to the police, citing their desperate need to protect our pristine family reputation. They aggressively prioritized shielding his future from a permanent criminal record over acknowledging the profound financial damage inflicted upon my independent life. They demanded my absolute silence and expected me to simply absorb the massive financial loss without voicing any further complaints. The absolute peak of their emotional manipulation arrived a few months later when they deliberately cornered me in the living room with a thick stack of binding financial documents. They systematically used family morality as a psychological weapon to force me into co-signing a massive commercial bank loan. That significant amount of borrowed money was intended to fully guarantee a completely empty business venture Chase had impulsively dreamed up without drafting any legitimate business plan. They genuinely expected me to blindly risk my own pristine credit score to fund his reckless entrepreneurial delusions, while they provided zero collateral themselves. "You have to help him because we are a family, and you cannot be selfish while watching your brother fall." Mom snapped at me sharply when I flatly refused to sign those disastrous financial papers. Her tone was completely saturated with a toxic mixture of guilt-tripping disappointment and irrational anger designed to break my resolve. Dad stood silently beside her with his arms crossed, silently endorsing every single manipulative word she directed at me. I looked directly into her eyes and delivered a definitive response that permanently severed our traditional family dynamics. I will not throw my future into the trash Chase created ever again, I stated firmly before immediately turning my back on their shocking demands. I methodically packed all of my essential belongings into several large bags and permanently moved out of their residence that exact same night. Removing myself completely from that suffocating environment was the only effective way to preserve my own sanity and protect my hard-earned assets. Dennis played a remarkably crucial role during that turbulent period by providing a fiercely objective perspective regarding my deeply flawed family structure. He patiently helped me wake up from years of psychological conditioning by highlighting exactly how my parents constantly prioritized my siblings' comfort over my basic well-being. Through his unwavering emotional support, I finally recognized the painful truth that I functioned merely as a backup financial tool designed to endlessly fund their favorite child. His vital intervention gave me the necessary strength to maintain impenetrable boundaries against their continuous attempts to drain my personal resources. Analyzing that dark personal history clearly illuminates the motivation behind the terrifying events currently unfolding around us. My parents knew with absolute certainty that I would never willingly hand over another dime to support those destructive habits after severing our financial ties so long ago. They understood perfectly well that asking for monetary assistance directly was no longer a viable option after I had successfully established my complete independence. That undeniable reality is precisely what forced them to orchestrate this violently coercive trap at the estate today. They resorted to utilizing armed debt collectors simply because traditional psychological manipulation had permanently lost its power over my decisions. 20 minutes after we officially reported the terrifying incident to the authorities and safely parked our vehicle in the heavily guarded station lot, the mobile phone in my hand suddenly began to ring. The brightly illuminated screen boldly displayed an incoming call directly from my parents, prompting me to immediately press the accept button and switch the device to speaker mode so Dennis could hear every single word of this confrontation. They did not immediately confess to their treacherous scheme or apologize for the terrifying ambush at the family estate. Instead, Mom started speaking in a sickeningly sweet voice, deliberately beating around the bush by asking where we were currently located. She then audaciously questioned why we had so rudely turned our car around without even stepping outside to properly greet the waiting guests. Her entirely fabricated ignorance completely drained whatever remaining patience I had left in my exhausted system. "You do not need to play pretend anymore because I already saw those aggressive debt collectors standing guard in the front yard," I stated firmly, effectively cutting off her ridiculous theatrical performance. A heavy silence dominated the phone line for several long seconds before Dad finally took over the highly tense conversation. Realizing that their carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled under my direct observation, they decided to reveal their true malicious intentions without any further hesitation. Dad coldly explained that Chase was drowning in an insurmountable mountain of financial debt owed to a notoriously violent underground credit syndicate. He explicitly demanded that I sign a legally binding power of attorney, transferring my company assets to clear those specific obligations, claiming that Chase would absolutely lose his life if I stubbornly refused to cooperate. When I remained completely silent, Dad escalated the volatile situation by delivering a highly calculated and devastatingly realistic threat against my personal livelihood. He promised that if I did not sign the documents immediately, they would hire aggressive corporate lawyers to falsely sue my business for disputed family assets. Furthermore, he threatened to deliberately spread fabricated financial rumors to the media designed to panic my primary investors into permanently pulling their crucial funding from my company. They essentially promised to systematically destroy my entire career if I refused to willingly sacrifice my hard-earned stability to rescue Chase from his own mistakes. I did not waste another breath arguing with people who viewed my total financial destruction as perfectly acceptable collateral damage. I abruptly ended the call without uttering another syllable and immediately saved the entire recorded conversation directly to my secure cloud storage drive. Stepping out of the vehicle with a renewed sense of purpose, I marched straight into the investigator's office to submit that undeniably incriminating audio file as concrete legal evidence of criminal extortion. While I was formally providing my detailed chronological statement to the detectives inside the building, a uniformed officer conducted a thorough physical inspection of our vehicle parked outside. The lead investigator eventually walked back into the interrogation room, holding a small plastic evidence bag containing a dark magnetic device. The police had successfully discovered an active GPS tracking device secretly attached to the metallic undercarriage of Dennis's car, just beneath the rear bumper. That chilling piece of technological evidence proved beyond any reasonable doubt that my parents had meticulously planned this violent extortion attempt well in advance. They had been actively monitoring our precise geographical movements across the entire state for days to ensure their malicious trap would spring at the exact perfect moment we arrived at the secluded property. This revelation confirmed they were not acting out of sudden desperation, but executing a cold and calculated criminal conspiracy against their own daughter. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the police station shrouded in heavy darkness, an unfamiliar number flashed across my mobile screen, carrying a sudden wave of pure panic. My youngest sister Quinn was on the other end, speaking in a violently trembling whisper while hiding in the suffocating darkness of a cramped bedroom closet. She hurriedly explained that her cell phone battery was rapidly draining down to its final few percentages during this utterly terrifying ordeal. Her terrified voice kept cracking with barely suppressed panic as she desperately tried to remain completely undetected by the hostile individuals roaming the hallways. The poor girl tearfully confessed that our parents had forcefully locked her inside that upstairs room to effectively prevent her from interfering with their malicious extortion trap. They had explicitly threatened to permanently revoke her entire college tuition fund unless she actively participated in their scheme by sending me those deceptive text messages earlier this week. They mercilessly used her bright academic future as a cruel bargaining chip to guarantee I would blindly walk into their orchestrated ambush at the secluded estate. The sheer depravity of weaponizing a teenager's educational aspirations just to cover up the disastrous financial mistakes made by her older sibling filled me with an unimaginable level of furious disgust. Please save me, because those terrifying men are stomping around heavily downstairs, making aggressive threats. Quinn sobbed hysterically through the receiver while struggling to muffle her own cries of sheer terror. She expressed genuine fear that those violent debt collectors would eventually smash through her fragile bedroom door if Chase completely failed to produce the massive sum of demanded money. Hearing the raw desperation radiating from her youthful voice completely ignited my protective instincts against the very people who were supposed to keep her safe from harm. You need to stay perfectly calm. Lock that door as tightly as possible, then conserve your remaining battery power, because I am bringing the authorities to get you out right now. I instructed her with a firm tone of absolute certainty. The fragile cellular connection abruptly died immediately after I delivered that crucial promise, leaving behind a chilling silence that echoed loudly in my ears. Refusing to waste another precious second indulging my own anxiety, I immediately dialed the primary contact number for my best friend Sarah. I quickly briefed her on the highly volatile situation, without diving into unnecessary background details, urgently requesting a massive personal favor to ensure my sister's ultimate safety. I asked her to immediately secure a discreet hotel room under a completely different name, so we would have a guaranteed safe haven ready for Quinn the moment we extracted her from that ongoing nightmare. Sarah agreed without a single moment of hesitation, promising to send me the confidential accommodation details within the next 10 minutes, while offering her unwavering support. Armed with this horrifying new development regarding an active hostage scenario, I sprinted back inside the precinct building to immediately update the lead investigator handling my extortion case. I formally reported that my teenage sibling was currently being held entirely against her will inside a property surrounded by highly hostile armed individuals. Providing the authorities with concrete evidence of unlawful imprisonment instantly elevated the overall severity of the ongoing criminal investigation to an absolute critical emergency level. This undeniable piece of actionable intelligence finally gave the county police department the solid legal foundation required to launch a direct tactical intervention at my family residence. The investigating officers could no longer treat this complex situation as a simple domestic financial dispute, when a vulnerable teenager's physical safety was actively being compromised by dangerous criminals. The lead detective immediately grabbed his radio to summon additional resources, acknowledging that rescuing an innocent hostage took absolute precedence over simply documenting a financial extortion attempt. At exactly 8 o'clock that evening, I sat firmly in the sterile waiting room of the police station to initiate a relentless series of aggressive legal countermeasures. Refusing to let my family dictate the terms of my own survival any longer, I immediately contacted my personal attorney to establish an impenetrable financial fortress around my entire livelihood. I instructed him to instantly execute an emergency freeze on all corporate accounts to permanently block any unauthorized withdrawal attempts from my business funds. My lawyer quickly drafted an emergency restraining order against my parents, alongside Chase, to ensure they could never legally approach me or my husband ever again. This decisive legal action essentially severed the final remaining ties to the people who had callously orchestrated my near destruction. I was no longer playing the role of the compliant daughter willing to absorb their toxic abuse just to maintain a fake picture of family unity. While my legal representative scrambled to lock down my assets, the precinct captain rigorously cross-referenced the detailed descriptions we provided regarding the suspicious men guarding the estate. He ran the specific license plate numbers Dennis had managed to memorize during the tense pursuit earlier that afternoon through the state criminal database. The search results confirmed our absolute worst fears regarding the true identity of the individuals currently terrorizing my childhood home. The captain gravely informed us that the vehicle belonged to a notoriously violent underground lending syndicate with an extensive history of aggressive weapons charges. They were not simply aggressive debt collectors making empty threats, but rather highly dangerous criminals who frequently utilized physical violence to extract their demanded payments. Given the confirmed danger level of this specific criminal organization, alongside your credible report of an active hostage situation, I am immediately requesting direct tactical support from the Special Weapons and Tactics Division. The captain declared with an unwavering tone of absolute authority. Hearing those specific words solidified the terrifying reality that my teenage sister was currently trapped inside a heavily armed powder keg waiting to explode. The atmosphere inside the police station shifted from a routine investigative procedure into a highly coordinated crisis management operation operating on borrowed time. The subsequent process of officially securing an emergency search warrant from the local on-call judge proved to be an incredibly nerve-wracking ordeal. The judicial review required a meticulous verification of the recorded extortion call, alongside my sworn testimony regarding the unlawful imprisonment of a minor. The judge meticulously analyzed every single piece of submitted evidence before finally signing the crucial legal document authorizing a forced entry into the private family estate. This critical legal approval finally gave the responding officers the undeniable authority needed to physically dismantle the dangerous trap my parents had so carefully constructed. Fully equipped SWAT team members quickly began flooding into the precinct briefing room, carrying heavy tactical gear while displaying expressions of intense focus. The specialized unit commander spread a detailed architectural blueprint of the property across a large table to meticulously plan their upcoming approach. They explicitly designed their tactical entry strategy to prioritize extracting Quinn safely without blindly charging into a potentially lethal crossfire. I watched the heavily armed professionals coordinate their precise movements, realizing that the quiet family home I grew up in was about to become the epicenter of a massive police raid. The terrifying situation had officially escalated far beyond a simple domestic dispute over borrowed money into a highly volatile confrontation involving state tactical forces. The clock struck exactly 11 at night when a heavily armored convoy of special tactical vehicles deactivated their headlights to silently approach the secluded Washington estate under the cover of darkness. Highly trained tactical operators immediately established an impenetrable perimeter designed to completely block every conceivable escape route surrounding the massive residential property. The seasoned officers moved with ruthless operational efficiency to swiftly neutralize the armed debt collectors patrolling the exterior grounds before any warning alarm could possibly be raised by the lookouts. After successfully securing the outside environment without firing a single shot, the designated entry team utilized a heavy tactical ram to forcefully breach the solid oak front door with a deafening crash that echoed loudly across the nearby lake. Dozens of heavily armed police officers instantly flooded into the spacious living room, fully expecting to find desperate criminals frantically destroying physical evidence to hide their ongoing crimes. Instead of witnessing some dramatic theatrical display of burning legal documents, the authorities interrupted a vicious verbal altercation occurring right in the middle of the house. My parents were screaming hysterically at Chase while violently blaming each other for the complete and utter failure of their carefully orchestrated extortion scheme. The undeniable reality of impending prison time had completely shattered their toxic familial loyalty, instantly turning them into vicious enemies, fighting desperately for their own individual self-preservation against the legal system. Facing the blinding tactical flashlights alongside multiple aimed weapons, the tough facade my sibling had previously displayed on the porch instantly evaporated into sheer, pathetic panic. It was entirely their idea from the beginning because they forced me to do it. I am just a helpless victim of those violent debt collectors. Chase stammered frantically while desperately pressing his back against the living room wall in absolute terror. He continued to shamelessly alter his ridiculous fabricated story every few seconds, while the commanding officers firmly ordered him to drop to his knees with his hands securely behind his head. Watching a grown man cowardly throw his own parents under the bus to save himself perfectly encapsulated the pathetic reality of his deeply flawed character in that defining moment. While the primary tactical unit effectively secured the chaotic ground floor, a specifically designated rescue squad sprinted up the main staircase to quickly locate the trapped hostage. The specialized officers swiftly bypassed the heavy locking mechanism on the guest bedroom door to finally liberate the terrified teenager who had been locked inside for several agonizing hours. They carefully escorted a deeply traumatized Quinn out of that suffocating environment before guiding her directly toward the flashing emergency lights illuminating the gravel driveway. Dennis was already standing anxiously beside a marked police cruiser, ready to wrap a thick protective blanket around her trembling shoulders, the absolute second she safely emerged from the compromised house. I stood completely still, hidden within the cold darkness just beyond the police perimeter, to silently witness the ultimate consequence of their unforgivable financial greed. The arresting officers firmly secured heavy steel handcuffs around the wrists of the very people who had brought me into this world before, forcefully marching them out the front door. Chase followed closely behind them in identical metal restraints, while openly weeping as a deputy firmly guided his head into the back of a secure transport van heading to the county jail. Observing my blood relatives being physically hauled away like common street criminals did not bring me any profound sense of joyful victory or cheerful celebration whatsoever. It merely provided a deeply hollow confirmation that the devastating cycle of psychological manipulation they had spent decades building was finally eradicated from my life forever. Exactly 3 months after the judge firmly banged the heavy wooden gavel to conclude the final sentencing hearing, my personal life officially entered a completely unburdened new chapter. Chase received a strict 5-year prison sentence behind bars after being convicted of criminal conspiracy alongside multiple felony extortion charges. The comprehensive judicial investigation undeniably proved his active involvement in bringing heavily armed debt collectors directly to our secluded family property. Meanwhile, my parents completely lost ownership of the sprawling Washington estate because the court ordered its immediate liquidation to pay off the massive remaining financial damages. They were also sentenced to strict supervised probation, requiring them to adhere to a permanent restraining order that legally forbade them from ever contacting me again. Watching them physically lose the precious material wealth they had prioritized over their own daughter's safety felt surprisingly hollow rather than victorious. The most crucial victory emerged when I finally completed the complex legal paperwork to secure full official guardianship over Quinn. She moved into our peaceful home the very next week and began intensely focusing on preparing her college applications without any lingering fear of being manipulated. Whenever I look at her studying quietly at the dining table, I do not feel any overwhelming sense of triumphant revenge against the people who raised us. I simply feel a profound mixture of lingering grief combined with immense relief that we finally escaped their suffocating cycle of toxic manipulation. The heavy burden of functioning as their perpetual financial backup plan has been permanently lifted from my shoulders, allowing me to finally breathe freely for the very first time in my adult life. Before we completely wrap up today's dramatic family story, let us take a moment to analyze the deeper psychological lessons hidden within this terrifying ordeal. As the creators sharing these intense personal experiences, I believe this specific situation highlights the absolute necessity of establishing impenetrable personal boundaries. First of all, drawing a hard line against toxic relatives is never an act of unnecessary cruelty. It is fundamentally an act of justified self-defense against emotional and financial exploitation. Secondly, you simply cannot save individuals who refuse to save themselves, and blind parental favoritism usually drags the entire family down into a destructive abyss. Ultimately, true family consists of the people who actively protect your well-being, rather than those who weaponize shared genetics to selfishly drain your future resources. If you ever found yourself standing in Bianca's incredibly difficult position, would you have possessed the courage to call the police on your own parents? Or would you have handled the extortion attempt differently? Please do not hesitate to share your unique perspectives or personal boundary-setting strategies down in the comment section below, because your insights might truly help someone else currently struggling. Thank you so much for patiently listening to this incredibly heavy journey all the way through to the very end today. I genuinely appreciate your continued support and deep empathy for these complex emotional topics we explore here together. Remember to leave a like if this story resonated with your own experiences, and please hit that subscribe button to ensure you never miss our next deeply impactful narrative. Lessons from this story. Blood relation does not grant anyone a free pass to exploit your success or endanger your life. Setting impenetrable boundaries against toxic parents is not a betrayal, it is a necessary act of self-preservation. You cannot sacrifice your own hard-earned stability to rescue someone who absolutely refuses to learn from their own destructive mistakes. True family protects the innocent members, rather than weaponizing their future to cover up a web of deceit. The most powerful form of revenge is walking away entirely and allowing the legal system to handle the devastating consequences.